Today, we are giving a program talk for a PowerPoint presentation that we are going to be presenting to the 6th grade classes at Wayne Local Middle School. My name is Mrs. Bunker, and I'm here today with Mrs. Miller, and Mr. Rieger is doing all of our videoing of this DVD for us. All of us are on the Board of Trustees for the Museum of the Friends Home. Many of us have heard stories over the years here in Waynesville of safe houses and tunnels and such, but we couldn't prove anything. They were just stories. Our group has set out to find the facts. In October of 2011, a group of us have set out to find out the facts. Our group is comprised of people from our library, our museum, and other local citizens. We have met at least once a month to find out what Waynesville's role was in the Underground Railroad. We call ourselves WORK, which stands for the Waynesville Underground Railroad Committee. We have visited many places, we have taken many pictures. We've read many things and we've talked to many people. We have accomplished a great deal in our 16 months of existence. This presentation will explain the different experiences that we've had and the discoveries that we've made. We will continue to search and find things that further prove that Waynesville was an important part of the Underground Railroad movement. With that, Mrs. Miller is going to explain our goals for work.
We're working with the Mary Elk Library and the Museum of the Friends Home here in Waynesville, and we've established the following goals. One would be to create a program and a walking tour that will bring to life the significance of the Underground Railroad movement in Waynesville. And our targeted audiences would be the Wayne Local Schools, which we're working right now with the 6th graders, and local residents and visitors to the area. Another goal would be to become part of the Network to Freedom program, which we will discuss later in our program. And the third one is to continue our research, including but not limited to visiting houses, buildings, sites thought to be part of the movement, reading and studying various documents that may give insight, such as Miami Monthly Minutes, journals, letters, newspaper articles, and oral stories from other residents, and so on. Fact versus folklore. What are we dealing with here? Our group is attempting to uncover facts that will help us prove that Waynesville was part of the Underground Railroad movement. We're following many leads and stories, folklores about possible safe houses, hiding places, and tunnels. We will tell you what we know as facts and what we cannot and what we can and cannot prove so far. What is the difference between facts and folklore? As we look for information on the Underground Railroad movement here in Waynesville, we've had a hard time separating the two. There are some things we do know to be facts, but most of our information seems to come from stories people heard when they were kids. For example, when I was growing up next to the Seth Silver Haynes house, we were told that the tower on top of the house was used as a lookout to signal the slaves coming up the Little Miami River. There was also a stairway at the back of the house that we would go down to when we thought was a tunnel. We were never allowed to go down to what we thought was a tunnel because the owners always told us that they were afraid the walls would cave in and it was dark and spooky. But we were told that it was part of the tunnel that slaves traveled through. Over the years, the stairs have been covered over and the so-called tunnel cannot be reached from the outside. So, last summer, some of us went over to Seth Silver Haynes' house and began some exploring in the basement. We went down the basement and searched up the passages. There was nothing to indicate that a tunnel had ever existed. We found a very small hole in a possible fireplace, but nothing large enough for a person to crawl through. We also found a 10-foot wide cistern in the middle of the house. Why was that cistern in the middle of the house? Who knows? Maybe slaves, maybe it was a hiding place. And we also found, the previous owners have also found artifacts over the years, but nothing to really prove that slaves were there. However, we do know a fact that Seth Haynes was a Quaker and was sympathetic to the anti-slavery movement. This is just one story, and we've heard many others. Hiding areas behind fireplaces, secret rooms, and secret stairways, but we really don't know.
Okay, and the big question is, where are we getting our information? How can we prove things? We have to remember that this was a very secret movement. Most of the Underground Railroad movement through Waynesville happened between 1816 through the 1860s. As it got closer to the Civil War, harboring freedom seekers became more dangerous. We are looking at things that have happened over 197 years ago, and a lot of things has changed in that time. Most of the freedom seekers could not read. No one spoke or publicly wrote about what was going on. For all the people involved, it was very dangerous and very secret. It is difficult today to find the facts. First, you need to know some of the terms we will be talking about. When we talk about Quakers, that's synonymous with Friends. We will interchange those two terms a lot. And the Friends belong to the Miami Monthly Meeting here in town. And that is the group of Quakers that attend the White Brick Meeting House presently. First, we wanted to categorize the info that we're collecting. These are our work sources and our evidence. You may have already learned about or know about primary evidence, and those are items compiled at the time of an event: diaries, journals, minutes of meetings, official records. We also are looking at secondary evidence, and those are newspaper articles or people who lived through something and are recalling it and writing it down. So we do have a primary source that we're using, and that is the Miami Monthly Meeting of Minutes, both the Hicksite and Orthodox. And I'm just briefly going to tell you how we found those. We contacted some of the Quakers that are living today, and they said that all of the minutes back from the early 1800s have been taken over to Wilmington College, to the Watson Library, where they are archived. A large group of us went over to Wilmington College. They went up in the archives, brought these very old books down, and we washed our hands and we very carefully paged through many of these old minutes. That's where we're finding some of our information. Our secondary source is Wilbur Siebert's, and he was a professor of history at Ohio State University. He died in 1961, but he is a very highly acclaimed researcher and historian, and we're using a lot of his work that will prove that Waynesville was part of the Underground Railroad. We've also looked through some Western Star articles, the Waynesville's first 200 years, which was written by the Waynesville Historical Society, a program by Mr. Bill Stubbs. Karen Campbell, the former historian at our Mariel Cook Library, wrote a book, Anti-Slavery in the Underground Railroad, Taking a Risk to Freedom. Denny Dalton has also written a book, Waynesville and Wayne Township. Marty Evans Osterday's book, The Evans Family. An oral history of Barbara Irons, who lived in the Miami house, we'll be talking about. Dallas Bogan, Warren County local history. And then we've listened to a lot of folklore, and that is handed down by word of mouth. And those are suspected safe houses in town, hiding places, and tunnels that we've heard a lot about over the years. The fact is that Waynesville does have over 100 homes that were built prior to 1865. And we are looking at all of those homes for possible hiding places. And the other fact, we do have storm sewers throughout the village. And many of these storm sewers, we suspect, are not connected to our more modern storm sewers. This is a separate system of sewers. This was a secret movement. They could not read. It is very difficult to find the hard evidence. No one spoke of what was going on. Okay. I think I'm going to go on and talk about, this here's
The National Underground Railroad Network for Freedom Act of 1998 directed the National Park Services to establish a program that would tell the story of the anti-slavery movement in the United States. Through this program, they can demonstrate the historical significance of the Underground Railroad nationwide. Our committee, the Waynesville Underground Railroad Committee, is working to become part of this network. There's a detailed application that we have to complete, and a huge part of it is when you actually involve the 6th grade students here at Waynesville. We want to share with the sixth grade students the information we have found about how slaves may have traveled through Waynesville and take them on a walking tour about town to see where slaves may have been hidden. Once we're accepted by the Network to Freedom, we will be recognized nationally.
Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Miami Monthly Meeting of Friends. From the very beginning, Quakers have sought God in all human beings, whether they are male, female, white, people of color, young or old. Although some early Quakers held slaves, many came to see that it was incompatible with their faith. This was especially difficult with the Friends who lived in the southern states. Many decided to move north because of their opposition to slavery. Abijah O'Neill, Robert Mills, David and Jesse Pugh were some of the first to move from Bush River, South Carolina, to this distant place in the new Northwest Territory called Waynesville. All that is left in Bush River is this historic marker that in part reads, "Opposing slavery, the members moved west to Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio." By 1811, this new meeting house was completed. Quakers still worship in this building today. This structure is the oldest regularly attended religious building west of the Allegheny Mountains. Now, what does that mean? This building has had a religious service each week since 1811. No other religious building west of the Allegheny Mountains can say that. Before this building was built, the Friends had gathered in a small log cabin as early as 1803. And then they moved to a larger cabin that they built in 1805, which is located across the street from this building. And it's now the site where our red brick meeting house is today, which was built a little later, and we'll talk about that history. Across the street, a little further west, is the Friends Burial Ground. Okay, this is the red brick, and this is the burial ground. And this was purchased by the Miami Monthly Meeting in 1804. And burials here were made without regard to status or family association, but rather by the date of the death. So this actually is the Orthodox side of the graveyard. And so if this person died in 1816, then the next person to die in town would be buried next to him, and so on. So this may be a wife, and her husband may not have died for 10 years, so he would be down the row of gravestones. There are some headstones there that originally were from the creek rock that was taken from the creek that's right behind those trees, and later there are these limestone headstones. And then the Miami Monthly Meeting built this schoolhouse in 1811, the same year that the white brick was built. And this schoolhouse had a diverse student body, which included African American, Native American, and white children. And then something very kind of sad happened for the Friends in 1828. Across America, there was a big split between the Quakers that lived in our country. Many Quakers remained Orthodox, and many split off and became Hicksite. The movement was started by Elijah Hicks. Hicksite Quakers, who are still here, believe much different thoughts than the Orthodox. One of the many big differences was that Orthodox Quakers have a minister, and the Hicksite do not. After the division between the Orthodox and the Hicksite Quakers maintained the occupancy of this white brick meeting house. Many families separated because of their religious differences. One brother might have been Orthodox, worshiping in the red brick, while another brother would be Hicksite, and he would be worshiping in the white brick across the street. When the meetings separated in 1828, the graveyard was also divided. The sugar maple in the middle of the graveyard separates the Hicksite from the Orthodox Quakers. John Satterthwaite, the builder of many buildings here in town, including the white brick meeting house, is buried on the Hicksite side. Abijah O'Neill, the first Quaker to arrive in Waynesville, is buried on the Orthodox side. In spite of the split, the Friends in both branches found ways to carry out their testimony against slavery and provided for the needs of freed slaves and their descendants. However, we have found that not all Quakers participated in the Underground Railroad movement. Some Friends struggled with the deceit and secrecy involved in the movement and chose not to be involved. But many Quaker families were active in assisting the runaway slaves on their way to freedom in Canada. And then we jump ahead about 100 years or so, and in 1920, the Orthodox membership had declined at the Red Brick Meeting House as members joined the Methodist Church and other denominations in town. And the Orthodox meeting was laid down or discontinued. The Hicksite Quakers purchased the Red Brick building and still own it today. Okay, and we do have a short timeline just to put this in some perspective. We started in 1803 when the Quakers first came here. They soon purchased the graveyard, and then they moved there to a cabin in 1805. 1811, the white brick meeting house was built, and then we jumped to 1827 and 28 when the split between the Orthodox and Hicksite Quakers occurred. In 1828, the Orthodox Quakers left the white brick and went back to the original cabin. And then later, in 1836, it was the Orthodox Quakers who built the red brick meeting house. And then we jumped to 1911, and they celebrated their centennial. And in 2011, they celebrated their bicentennial. And with that, I think Mrs. Miller is going to talk about the minutes of.
These are pages actually taken from the Miami Monthly Minutes that the group that went over to Wilmington College to do research found. This particular page or pages was dated August 8, 1840, and starts out, "The following epistle of advice on slavery from the Meetings for Suffering was read to satisfaction, and a clerk is directed to furnish each preparative meeting with a copy." And it goes on to say, "Dear friends, the attention of this meeting has been arrested by the commotion and excitement which at present agitate the public mind in this country on the subject of slavery." And then it goes on to say that the Quakers, or the Friends, as they were known, hoped to help abolish slavery on peaceable principles, and were glad that other Christian groups were stepping up to help. This information is found in between information about money needed to help a man by the name of David Doles, and information about a man who had violated his testimony against marriage. So as you can see, the writing is very difficult to read, and information about slavery is often found hidden in other recordings.
Okay, one of the other things we attempted to find was early maps. We wanted to know what it was like when those Quakers first came to town. And by happenstance, in talking to Mr. Ed Andrus, he did share with us this map. It's one of the earliest ones that we've been able to find. And this was in 1804. And the Northwest Territory had just been established and creating 5 new states. And what was interesting about this is that these new states did not allow slavery. So when you look at the map, what I seem to notice is the fact that you have many, many creeks. You have Indian lands up to the north of Ohio, but right in our area, you have many rivers and waterways. And I think that's important in our further search of Underground Railroad stations. So we're focusing on this corner right in here. Um, Our next map actually jumps up to 1875, but one of the reasons we were interested in this is because in each one of these little blocks, we have names of the owners of that land. And many familiar names, Satterway, Cook, and some of these names are still around today, but this is giving us more information, and we are hopefully going to investigate these names and looking for family journals and diaries of some of these folks. This is another important map. This is one of our secondary sources. This was a map created by Wilbur Siebert, and this shows all of the Underground Railroad paths and ways going up towards Lake Erie and up into Canada. So we're really looking at this map very closely. And if we go into it a little bit, this is a fact. If you look at the map here, what we find very interesting is the fact that not only do we have Waynesville here, but we have Springboro, and it goes Springboro, Waynesville, Harveysburg, Oakland. Many historians that we've talked to say that that's a very important fact. We think many people came to Springboro and then headed east. The most interesting part of our work journey here is to visit different places. And one of the first places we visited was Springboro. And as you notice on the bottom slide here, it says, founded in 1815 as a Quaker community, it was a safe haven for the Underground Railroad. And that was about 8 years after Waynesville had been founded. We did go into their museum that's run by their historical society. The middle picture is their actual museum. We also toured the Jonathan Wright home, which is up here in this corner. And that is a proven safe house. It is on the National Register of Historic Places, and that is the hiding place, and that has been proven. So that has given us a lot of information and helped us in what we're looking for here in Waynesville. The next house is the Butterworth House, and this is an interesting one. This is near the Little Miami River, south of Lebanon, and it has been proven to be a safe house. And we were fortunate enough to have the owners invite us into this home. And just to give you a little geography here, there's a big farm field to the right of this, and then beyond that is the Little Miami River. So we do believe that the freedom seekers would come up the river, they would come across the field, and over behind this little hillside here, there was a little door that went into a side room in the house. And that was where the freedom seekers hid. Now when they did that, we know that it was probably very dark, very damp, and very scary. Today, it doesn't look like that. And this is what it looks like today. And how wonderful it would have been had they walked into a room like that, with light and washing machines and all the conveniences of 2013. What we're noticing in many of these old safe houses or older homes are the fireplaces. They kind of give you the age that this is a very old home. Another home we have investigated is the Moses McKay home. And he came to the Waynesville area. This house actually is on New Burlington Road here in Wayne Township. And he came with his 22 freed slaves. They lived on this property and built this house in 1818. Moses' grandson, Jonas T. McKay, was intensely involved in the abolition movement and operated this as a safe house, as a station from the 1830s through the Civil War. The runaway slaves hid in a cellar underneath the original kitchen. The room was circular in shape. A ladder led down to the cellar. The room would accommodate 8 people. It had no heat nor windows. That part of the house is no longer there. And much of the information that I just read was from this document. The Corps of Engineers purchased the property many years ago, back in 1977. And the historian for the Corps of Engineers actually did have to do the research on the home. And that's one other piece of evidence that we will be using. We were able to go into the home. Mr. Howard Doster and his wife Barbara graciously shared their home with us and showed us the different places. This is the place that Howard said was the area what we're talking about. Underneath this is where that part of the basement would have been, but since they renovated it, there is no evidence of that today. He also suspected that this shed or outbuilding was also used as a hiding spot. There is a cistern through that door there that is all filled in with debris, and hopefully someday somebody will be able to research that a little bit more. Then we went out to Lower Springboro Road, and this is the home of Benjamin Evans. The Evans family came here in 1804 from Bush River. The Evans were Quaker. We found out later that this home is the son of Benjamin Evans, and this is a little bit of a mystery because at first we thought the two houses were the same. This is a very old picture, but this house actually stands by itself. It did not look like that back in the early 1800s. The gentleman who presently owns the house and a friend of his showed us that in this part of the house there had been some type of a secret room. It was very hard today to identify that because of the building of this new part of the house. So with many of these old places, they have been upgraded and a lot of the history may have been lost. This is the fireplace in the Benjamin Evans house. Again, it's a very, very old fireplace. And this is just one of the minutes, and throughout and these are Orthodox minutes, we found Thomas Evans' name here, and he was the clerk in 1835 of the Orthodox meeting. Okay, and here are the Evans houses. It was really a big family in Waynesville, and we believe that they were abolitionists. We know that Benjamin Evans came here, and he was from Bush River. That's his first house. Then he had many children, and his oldest son was Thomas Evans, and that is Thomas Evans' house, and that's someplace near where the covered bridge is. It's off of Clarksville Road, we think. It may have been destroyed by fire. We're in the search to find that house, if it still exists. Another son of Benjamin Evans built this home and lived here, and he was a very prominent man. We're looking at that as possibly a safe house. And one fact that we were able to disprove, many of the old articles say that this house was part of the Underground Railroad and that was a lookout. That is incorrect. This house was built in 1882, if I'm not mistaken, 1886. It was built after the Civil War. It was owned by Benjamin Evans' grandson, Joel Evans, but again, we've discounted that as being a safe house. It was built after. Okay, the next information we're going to give you is on, we went over to Pioneer Village, Caesars Creek, Pioneer Village. We suspect that the buildings, 3 of them there, were safe houses. This has not yet been proven, but we did investigate them. First one is the Caesars Creek monthly meeting, and this is their meeting house. It was in a different location when the Corps of Engineers purchased the property. Rather than having that building torn down, it was moved over to Pioneer Village. And this is one of the stories that we've heard, and the story goes that a freedom seeker came into the meeting house, and he was being chased by bounty hunters. He was hidden under a woman's dress. Now, they have the interior of that meeting house exactly the way it was back in the early 1800s, and we just reenacted this. We had one of our committee members put this outfit on, and she actually is sitting in the very same bench that woman would have been sitting in many years ago, hiding the freedom seeker. Another building, the Hawkins cabin, as the story goes, there is a ledge behind this stone part of the hearth of the fireplace. There is a hole up above it with a picture in front of it. As the legend goes, either somebody could have been boosted up and down in there to stand on the ledge of there, or possibly go up and stand on the ledge another way. But that is supposed to be a hiding place. We have no solid proof of this. The Lukens cabin, this is on its original site in Pioneer Village. There is a suspicion that there might have been freedom seekers hid in the basement of this building. This is the interior of that cabin, and this is the basement where, if the freedom seekers did hide, this was probably the area. We also are looking at newspaper articles, and this one was written in 1976 by a woman by the name of Edwina Harvey. And she had a series of 6 articles. The third one was about Waynesville, and in that she's mentioning many of the safe houses that we are going to be mentioning today. Another thing that we've done was the accommodation line involved in the Underground Railroad movement. It was owned by John Satterthwaite, who built the white brick meeting house. We suspect his home on 3rd Street may have been a safe house, but we have not proved this yet. And we interviewed a gentleman by the name of Ed Andrus, who actually wrote this book on the accommodation line. The accommodation line went from Springfield, Ohio, down to Cincinnati. Waynesville was the halfway point of this stagecoach line, and it was very active 1820s to 1830s, right before the railroad came into being. Okay, and this is the Miami House, where the Cobblestone Restaurant is today.
This was an old inn. It was built in 1826, and there was a hidden room in the attic. To gain entry to it, you had to press a board in the wall. Steps between the wall connected the room with a tunnel entrance in the basement. It would have been easy then for slaves to come up the Little Miami River through a tunnel and hide there. When the inn was demolished in 1955 to build a drive-in restaurant, some chicken bones and a cornhusk gull were found at the bottom of the stairs near the entrance to the tunnel. That restaurant then has since been torn down also, and now the cobblestone is there in its place. One of the families that lived there was by the name of Irons. Well, their name was Stanley, but this is the daughter, and she has some. She knows quite a bit about the house, and we have a recording of her. So that's another source. She told some stories about hiding and being afraid of some of the rooms in the house.
Okay, and another fun part of our journey is we are exploring basements of suspected safe houses. And this particular journey took us in September of 2012. We cannot prove that these are safe houses, but all of these properties are on the National Register of Historic Places, along with all of our buildings on Main Street. We looked at the Mad Anthony Curio Shop, built in 1839, and the Hamel House, which was also called the Guston Hotel. The old Curiosity Shop, we went down into the basement, and so many of these basements have been so changed over the years. You have a concrete block, you've got heating, water lines that were never there. But in this particular part of it, we did find this old fireplace in the basement of that building. Again, we can't prove anything, but it was interesting and enjoyable seeing that. Hamel House has long been suspected of being a safe house. It is a building with great history. When we went down in the basement, we did find this arched brick area that we have no idea what that may have been used for, and many, many rooms. We went through room after room. People have not been down there in a long time. We were covered with cobwebs when we came out of there. This house had an unusual story. In the middle of their dining room, they had a hole that had been covered up with wood, and it was impossible to open that from the dining room area. So our spelunkers, who have been working with us and going into a lot of these dusty, dirty places, actually went down, and it was very difficult to get back into this area. It was so tight that all he could do is take his camera and take that shot, and we found out from that photograph that that was a well, not a cistern. Whether that could have been a hiding place in the middle of a room in the back of that house, we don't know, but it was very interesting. Has anybody ever heard of Crosswick? Most of the students that we'll be working with probably have not. Okay, and if you go out Old Stage Road and you have the library, and you go past the library, we have Preston, and you continue out of town. Many of you have noticed the fork in the road. One way goes up to Bellbrook on Bellbrook Road, the other is Old Stage. Right where that cross area was Crosswick, probably why it was named that. It was founded or platted by James Jennings in 1821. It is also known as Crosswicks with an S. And there's a gentleman who passed away in 2002 who gave a little information on this, and the Ellis family settled on a 63-acre farm in the Crosswick community, north of Waynesville on Belbrook Road. In 1860, 45 African Americans lived in Crosswick. The community was large enough at the end of 1859 to establish the Crosswick Colored School. There was also information that a Gladman Ellis went to this one-room schoolhouse for African Americans in Crosswick, and the Curtis family also went to school there. So that's an interesting bit of information. There are very, very few African American people living in Waynesville today. Probably the most interesting and talked about was our storm sewers, and do they exist in Waynesville? Yes, the storm sewers do. We did an investigation in Corwin. We've gone behind the lockup in the alley from the corner of Chapman to the Chapman and Main. And this is very important. This was very, very dangerous work. We did have the permission and we signed waivers from the village of Waynesville. The 3 men who investigated the storm sewers were experienced spelunkers. Of course, spelunkers go into dark caves, and it is very dangerous, and they were very experienced at doing our work. And we have permission of the owners of the property. This is a map. Every little black dot on this map is a home that was built prior to the Civil War, so we would like to eventually look at most of those homes. The first information we had was from Doug Furness, who's a local resident, who said that when he was a very young boy, he remembered going through the storm sewer, and he says that he went as far as 4th and Miami Street. Thank goodness he's still alive today. That had anything happened to him, no one would have ever found him. He actually went in the old storm sewer behind the lockup. The next person that we talked to was Jim Prickett, and in the 1970s he went from a place in the alley up to the lockup, and he did take pictures. We do have those pictures. And finally, with our investigation, we did get some very good pictures, which I'll soon be showing you. We're going to talk about the storm sewer in Corwin. You need to understand a little bit about the history of Corwin. The Little Miami Railroad came through this town. Corwin is right across the river from us. And the railroad went north and south. And this is our railroad terminal, and it did say Waynesville. That plaque is actually in our museum. Across the street was the Panhandle Hotel. The story has it that freedom seekers would come off the railroad, they would go in a tunnel underneath the Panhandle Hotel. Here's another angle, here's where the railroad would be, and here's the Panhandle Hotel. The tunnel would go underneath that. There was supposedly a rock behind the Panhandle Hotel, and the freedom seekers would come out there. Across the street and up the hill, this house had been right across the street from the Miami Cemetery. That house burned in 1978. That was Abijah O'Neill's house, and that was a big historical loss to our area, but we believe that that was a safe house. We are questioning the role of the Little Miami Railroad. We took another field trip down to an area close to Cincinnati and Milford, and that's where Camp Dennison was. It was a Union Army recruiting and training post from 1861 to 1875. 1865. That's when the Civil War was going on. This is the Little Miami Railroad. This railroad went right through this camp, and that's the same one that came into Corwin and Waynesville and going north and south. We don't know what part that railroad played in the Underground Railroad movement during those war years. This is when the spelunkers found the entrance to the storm sewer. This house is where the Panhandle used to be. Mr. Perky lives there, and right beyond that would have been the Abijah O'Neill house. they did not have much success. That the changing of the road, and it actually came to a dead end. It was all filled in there. We move on to the lockup. This is our second adventure. Unfortunately, when the lockup was renovated in the early 2000s, there was much change done to the storm sewer that had existed there. This picture of the storm sewer is what all new storm sewers look like today, and they're not very historical, and that's not what we're looking for. The area that had been a old storm sewer has been retrofitted with this newer tunnel. The third tunnel was located in the alley and goes to Chapman, Maine. And this, of course, was our most interesting one. This is the one that Mr. Prickett had investigated in the 1970s. This was the entrance to the old storm sewer. This is the route that the gentleman took in the storm sewer. In measuring it was about 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet. They did crawl through it. They had excellent equipment, excellent lights, and excellent cameras. Part of this, it turns, it goes up steps in places, and notice how the craftsmanship, we question who built this. It was early. Our problem is all of our village records were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1900, so we have no record of when these old storm sewers were built. There's a roof cave in here. This is what's the dangerous part of this. There are stairs going up into a smaller chamber. Top of these steps, they looked into a brick line with an arch ceiling. And here you have your limestone, and then this opens up to about 4 to 5 feet, and it's all brick in a rounded arched chamber. Curving up and to the right, continuing on to a straighter section of tunnel. And then at the end of the tunnel, we don't know if this is under someone's house, in their basement, but this has been filled in. I don't know if it's a collapse, but this was the end of the road. And then this is their journey going east towards the river. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Seth Silverhanes. Noah Haynes, excuse me.
This is Noah Haynes' house. It was built in 1822. Noah Haynes was a Quaker, and he came to Waynesville in 1807. He was the father of Seth Silverhanes. We've talked about him earlier. And he served as the Indian commissioner. The Indians would come to town to meet with him and would camp on the hillside here in Waynesville, basically behind this particular house. Although Noah was a Quaker and a sympathizer of the Underground Railroad movement, there's no indication that slaves actually were hidden in this particular house. But his son's house was just down the hill, so who knows? We can just kind of speculate on those kinds of things.
Okay, and this house is the Thomas Arnett home, and he was an abolitionist who preached against slavery. He was a resident of Waynesville, and he was an Orthodox Quaker minister, and he preached in the Red Brick Meeting House. He came to Waynesville in 1847 with his wife, but shortly after he left for England, Ireland, and Europe, and he preached as a traveling minister. While he was gone, his friend John Hayden, who was a Waynesville Methodist Episcopal minister, wrote him of his wife's death. In 1852, Thomas returned to Waynesville and married a Hannah Hudson. And in 1866, when Thomas was 77 years old, he built this house and lived there for 10 years. He wrote 3 books, and one of his books was the Address to the Christian Traveler. And in that, he writes about the evils of slavery. Quote, the subject of slavery is so vast and is of such an atrocity that it appears to be one of the greatest crimes in the whole world. His good friends were Achilles Pugh and Jesse Harvey, who were really big abolitionists of our area. Rachel and Thomas are buried in the Orthodox side of the Friends burial ground. And we got this information from Karen Campbell, who is a researcher and historian, and in her book she does speak about Thomas Arnett and the history that he brings to town.
Mary just mentioned Achilles Pew. This is Achilles Pew's home. He's it's known as the Achilles Pew House, located on the corner of Main and South Streets. Achilles was an active participant in the Underground Railroad movement, and not only published a newspaper on anti-slavery, but also helped slaves who were traveling north. The Pew family moved to Waynesville in 1854 and eventually bought all the land from the present-day Subway and McDonald's up South Street to Quaker Hill. According to the Warren County records, this particular house was built in 1876, which means that it was during or after the Civil War, so we know that the slaves weren't hidden here. But this is also some information we've gotten from Karen Campbell and some various archives, and lots of stories in here about Achilles' family. A particular letter from his daughter talking about how she remembers as a kid having slaves coming to their house and how her father had provided money to help them along the way. This is a picture of Wilbur Siebert. You've heard us talk about him quite a bit. He has provided us with lots of information on the Underground Railroad. In the 1890s, as we had said before, he was a professor at The Ohio State University and sent a questionnaire out to many people whom he thought had contact with the Underground Railroad movement. He compiled all this information in books that are now stored in Columbus in the Ohio Historical Society. Several of these letters do mention Waynesville. This one particular letter was written February 22nd, 1932. And Mary and I were discussing the date because we're not sure that it obviously says 1932 on the letter, but we're not so sure the date's quite accurate. But anyhow, it was written to Mr. Siebert from Mr. Warwick. And Mr. Warwick grew up in Massey Township near Harrisburg, and his school days were spent in Waynesville. In his letter, he writes that both Harrisburg and Waynesville were on the Underground Railroad route. He says, I quote, "When I was a boy, in my neighborhood, there was one colored family, and in another community some 3 miles away, there was a second colored family. Their forebears had been slaves. When I became a resident of Waynesville, it had one colored family. The father and mother had been slaves. The Waynesville neighborhood was in my day quite largely populated with Friends, both Hicksite and Orthodox branches of the Quaker faith." 2 other letters, the one over on your right was written by a Mr. E.S. Shepherdson. His parents were abolitionists and lived in Cincinnati. Since he was quite young when the slaves were traveling through the area, his memory is limited, but he did know that Cincinnati was one of the great central stations on the Underground Railroad, and that towns nearby were, and I quote from his letter, "sympathizing Friends, or Quakers, were ready to furnish transportation to towns in the interior of the state. Waynesville especially, near Lebanon, a Quaker settlement that has probably sheltered more fugitives and further them on their way than any other place in the state of Ohio." In his letter, he also suggests that W.H. Siebert write to the Waynesville postmaster for more information and names of people who would likely be known or know something about the Underground Railroad movement. The letter on your left was written by Thomas Miller, and it was dated October 18th, 1895. And it says, I quote, "Dear friend, thy letter just came to hand, and I will answer the best I can. I often see black people at my father's 8 miles northeast of Springboro, sometimes 2 or 3, and other times 6 or 8, and sometimes they stayed a few days and sometimes longer. I remember when there were 6 or 8 there came friends, 8 miles from Springboro, which was a depot, to tell us their masters were hunting for them, and we put them in the cornfield. And after I married, there came a black man to my door and asked for something to eat. And soon there came men inquiring for runaway slaves. I have talked with William Bend of West Elkton. He says Levi Coffin of Cincinnati often spoke to him and told him he had some loading for him and when to come such a night. And he would go and get them and take them home and take them to the next station the next night. And I sent my team, and took 5 or 6 to Waynesville, and he took charge of them, and next day bragged of having $10,000 worth of Kentucky property in his cellar last night." So we can only speculate that the Kentucky property would have been slaves. When we do the walking tour with the children and do this PowerPoint presentation, it's in conjunction with a trip that they're going to be making to a Camp Joy. It's a camp, it's an educational camp, we're spending the night, and there they will be part of a play. During this play, they will become slaves and actually get to participate on the Underground Railroad. As our program, we are also going to do a walking tour of Waynesville. We're going to start out at the school, and we're going to walk down to the Quaker sites and share some information there about the Quakers, and then move on to down to Main Street and travel through the town, visiting and sharing with them possible sites that are on the Underground Railroad. And these are just pictures of some of the places that we will be addressing. That concludes our program.